Hey guys, so I know a lot of you are focused more so on the post-Infinite Forbidden format, but for the time being, Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge did recently come out, and we also had the Central American WCQ, so as usual, I wanted to sort of provide a staple tier list based on topping information from that Central America WCQ, as well as also some dueling book data to map out some of the best hand traps and staples. And as always, definitely go check out my discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Supplies as well as singles. Want to highlight that, of course, Tier 0 games, Trading Card Mint, as well as Card Brawlers, they do have their singles up for Battles of Legend that you can certainly go check out and get some pretty sweet cards like Phantom Yubel, so definitely go check those discount codes in the description below. Anyways, let's just get to the staple tier list. For this month, we're going to start with Ash. For the most part, it always ends up being first. There's not really much to say about it other than it is generic, and because it's also seen in pretty much most decks, it's always really going to get ranked really high. You do have talents. This is, of course, very popular. We are in a very hand trap heavy format, so talents is going to be live a lot of times. You know, extra punish them when you're going first and also going second to become a very, very popular board breaker, just taking away your opponent's card. Let's say even something like Appaloosa, it's kind of handy right now. You have Feather Duster, which actually, as surprising as it might sound, before the last couple formats, it was actually not really in the highest tier, but nowadays, especially with Tenpai Dragons taking up a lot of the top cut, especially at that Central American WCQ, a decent amount, right? And a deck like that, because they are going second, they're going to be playing Feather Duster as kind of like a guaranteed thing, so it's definitely come up again in terms of scoring. You also have Call by the Grave, not much to say about this one as well. As I mentioned, it is hand trap kind of heavy right now, but you know what, going second as well, this card can be pretty relevant in the current format too. And then you of course have Imperm as another hand trap. Effect negation cards have been pretty popular ever since Snake Eye have become tier 1, which has been, you know, really 4 months at least at this point now. So moving on to the next section, we do have Forbidden Droplet. This has been quite popular lately as a board breaker. Even, let's say, branded lists that normally play Super Poly have opted to play Forbidden Droplet instead. You know, being able to go first or second, it's very flexible. Also can be used in the damage set, which can potentially be relevant against Tenpai Dragons. Although at the same time, Dark Ruler No More has definitely started to pick up some interest again, and I'm sure moving forward, post-Infinite Forbidden, that card will also see a bit more play as well. We also have Lightning Storm, kind of similar to the lines of Feather Duster that I was speaking of, because you have a lot of Tenpai Dragons making up top cut. Then you are also going to see Lightning Storm in a deck like that, especially in the main, just because it's kind of flexible, quote unquote flexible, in terms of being able to hit monsters or back row. But of course, you know, if they're forced to go first, obviously not great, but still worthwhile to play. And then you have Skill Drain. This is kind of sad to see. You are seeing this a lot in terms of, let's say, Snake Eye list. They're just going to be playing this at the very least in the side because, you know, as long as you go first, you're going to just pretty much force your opponent into submission. You know, in terms of, let's say, some of the newer relevant strategies, Ritual Beasts, which I know isn't actually new, but they did get some support in Terminal Revenge. I was actually seeing them play Skill Drain as well. I don't know too much about the deck. I've placed it a couple times now so far in this kind of like quote unquote new format. And, you know, they just do a lot of summoning, but I guess if they can put up big bodies, or any deck that can put up big bodies, something like, let's say, even Centurion, like they can play Skill Drain as well. Cosmic Cyclone, this is really strong as well, just going first or second, which is actually quite relevant for Tenpai Dragons themselves, because sometimes, well, actually pretty much every time after they win game 1, they're not going to know whether their opponent is going to force them to go first or second, and Cosmic Cyclone becomes pretty flexible in that regard. And of course, against Tenpai themselves, getting rid of the field spell is nice. You have some other meta strategies like Yubel, Voiceless Voice. They happen to have a lot of continuous spells or field spell, let's say in the case of Yubel, that you can also snipe out, and against Snake Eye can also potentially be relevant in terms of whatever they spell out of, or summon out of the spell trap zone. So next you have Crossout. So this actually came out quite a lot in my ban list prediction survey video that you can certainly go check out if you haven't. I guess people are kind of getting tired of it as well. I mean, it's a hand trap heavy format, but this card can also be very strong in the mirror, which you're going to expect a lot of, especially in premier level events when you have Snake Eye being so dominant. I guess people were kind of tired of, let's say, for example, something along the lines of Called By, you know, when it went to 1. It just kind of helps out like the meta decks a little more than it would help rogue decks in terms of being able to play through hand traps. Another interesting thing I noticed in the Central American WCQ that topped a Tenpai Dragon list was actually citing Crossout plus even Gimmick Puppet. So I guess, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, so they were trying to play through that as well. So next you have Cashier Fenrir. This is a card that, of course, for quite some time now, many people have calling for hits to this card. I mean, you know, it is seeing a decent amount of play, especially as like a small Cashier engine in general, and a lot of different decks, let's say with like Snake Eye, for example. But I don't think like the 3 Fenrir is seeing as much play as it was at one point, you know, a few months back. I think maybe like even last fall. So it's not as common, but you know what, maybe worthwhile hitting in the future. But I really would not be surprised if they don't hit this again. And then you have Nibiru, which for the most part really is there because of something like Snake Eye, in terms of just impactful hand traps. Outside of Snake Eye though, I don't think it's all that particularly good. I mean, for example, you have Voiceless, which it was never good against. Let's say something like Tenpai Dragons, obviously not going to be, it's not going to work. And then let's say, I don't know, with Yubel, at least in my limited experience so far, post Battles of Legend, because the set did kind of recently come out, it didn't seem that great either, just in terms of them being able to go through now Phantom Yubel, which is available post battles. So I think it's not as great against other decks, but still pretty strong overall because of Snake Eye's dominance. And then you have D-Barrier, kind of sad to see, of course, to see this high. It is still pretty popular because everything, I guess, outside of Snake Eye, it's going to be good. As I mentioned many times, right? Tenpai Dragon Synchro, Branded Fusion, Melodious Fusion, Pearly, which isn't seeing that much success anyways, but you can do it anyways. Xyz, Voiceless Voice, so with Ritual, so, you know, it can hit basically everything outside of Snake Eye. So if you can fit it, you can definitely play this, and especially with Tenpai, because it's very likely that you will just get OTK'd, at least D-Barrier can help you survive. Then you have more effect negation, like Effect Failure. You're going to see Ghost Spawner a little bit later as well, so not too much to say here. Ghost Ogre is another unique one, of course. Something like Tenpai Dragons, you know, if they have to use a field spell search effect, this is going to be pretty strong if you have the room for it. I mean, it definitely provides a little bit more unique interaction than some of the other hand traps that are available. Again, like something like Voiceless Voice, Yubel, they do tend to have a lot of continuous like spells that you can also hit with this. And then you have Droll. So while it has not been popular the last couple of months, at the same time, because of course at one point, you know, not that long ago, it was seen in at the very least everyone's side deck. But you know what, I think in this most recent event, post Battles of Legend, at the Central American WCQ, I think it did see an uptick in play, and I'm sure it may continue to see an uptick in play as we head into Infinite Forbidden format. So at least keep an eye out for Droll as well. Anti-Spell Fragrance, for some reason on Dueling Book, it didn't see any kind of, at least not enough play, I guess. I mean, it is at 1, so it's probably not registering as much. But you know what, in terms of side decks, it is definitely seeing a lot of play. And because we did see Summon Limit get banned, and I don't know why Anti-Spell wasn't banned along with it, kind of weird logic there, maybe because it was being reprinted, I'm not sure, but I do think that this will definitely get on the ban list at some point very soon. And then you have Ghost Mourner. I kind of spoke about this in terms of effect negation. The kind of burn effect is nice too, just in terms of time. And then you have something like Evenly Match, which I do think is a good card. But at the same time, because you have a big chunk of the top cut being represented by Tenpai Dragons, and they're obviously not going to play evenly match, right? Because that defeats the whole purpose of the deck of OTKing during battle phase, and you can't just give up the battle phase in that deck. So because such a big part of the topping deck in Tenpai Dragons cannot play evenly match, I think that's why it's kind of scoring low. But otherwise, I think if you can play it, especially in multiple copies, I think it's actually still pretty strong. You know, against Snake Eye, you can kind of obliterate a lot of cards. Of course, they have a very strong clapback game, so you do still have to do some more action after that. And then something like, let's say, like Yubel as well, as long as you, if they had the rank 10 and you can kind of go through that negate, I think evenly can also be pretty strong against that strategy too. And then Bestials in general, this is still seeing a pretty good amount of play. This is also popular in Tenpai Dragons, right? Because it can search any dragons for them to go second. There's still some branded here and there, and of course Gimmick Lock, it's still like worth respecting. So I think branded, or rather Bestials, are pretty strong there, and they themselves are playing Bestials too, of course. So you know what, against something like Snake Eye, it still comes up Voiceless Voice. You do still have to respect them. Against Yubel, I feel like it hasn't been that great. Maybe I'm just not very good. So if you do play Yubel, you can certainly let me know if it is that impactful, and if so, where you should hit it. But I felt like it wasn't as great as I thought it would be, considering they're all really dark monsters. And then you have Thrust. I don't actually think this is that popular. I mean, obviously in branded, they're always going to play it, but you know, something like Snake Eye, they're not really playing this. So it's not really as popular, certainly if you had rewinded a year ago, where this is definitely one of the more popular cards, but definitely not really up there anymore. Dark Ruler, I sort of spoke about this earlier with Droplet, definitely seeing a bit more play nowadays, especially even in the main deck. I mean, I was actually finding a decent amount of branded lists were starting to play this in the main as well, rather than Droplet. I mean, I guess there's, you know, some ways to debate for that. I mean, obviously branded, for one, they do kind of struggle with like hand advantage at the beginning of their play, so that can be a little bit better for them, especially, for example, they can also struggle with like very monster heavy boards because, you know, they don't have access to, like, let's say Zeus board wipes or like a Typhon play to kind of freeze the board, or because, I mean, maybe you can Mirror Jade crash and then nuke the board, but that's kind of hard to probably get to at that point. So Dark Ruler can definitely be pretty good for that deck as well, and I'm sure a lot of other strategies. Of course, Sprite has a little bit of additional support with, let's say, something like the freezing whatever Ice Barrier cards to help them get into Toad a little easier, and of course Sprite, Notorious, you know, Dark Ruler has been strong against them. I don't actually know if Sprite would actually be like really meta relevant again. Don't get me wrong, I really love that deck. I've played it for quite some time, but you know what, I think perhaps it's to be seen, but I think it's still kind of at the rogue level at this point. And then finally we have DD Crow. This has been a pretty popular hand trap as well, because it's also applicable to pretty much every deck against Snake Eye, against Tenpai Dragons, you know, whatever I guess like Biden summons maybe, but it really does come up against pretty much every strategy at this point. So if you can fit it, definitely a strong one. Rivalry is another floodgate that I also think will get banned just because of how strong it is right now. If there is a deck that can play Rivalry, you're pretty much seeing the main deck this, because whether you go first or second, it can be really strong. Can essentially, going second can serve as like a board break, essentially, if you can, like, if they have some kind of negate that you can bait out. So really strong, but unfortunately maybe won't be too surprising if it does actually get banned. And then speaking of ban, hopefully Dimension Shifter as well, but it's actually not seeing that much play technically because of the topping list. Really, I mean, Tenpai Dragons of course can play this usually in the side deck, but you're not really seeing much of Flunder top anymore, and even Cashier has taken a step back as well, especially at the Central American WCQ. So that's kind of why scoring wise it's definitely gone down, because not as many topping deck lists are playing Shifter aside from Tenpai, but nonetheless, you know, if you can play Shifter, obviously it's a very strong hand trap that you should play if you can, but otherwise overall representation wise it's definitely not as high. Alright guys, so that was it for the staple tier list for this month. Hopefully that was helpful in terms of helping you prepare your list for whatever events that you may have upcoming. Definitely looking forward to Infinite Forbidden format, of course. Who knows if we get a ban list before that? Probably doubtful, but one can hope. But anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors for the continued support as always, and well, take care guys.